Good afternoon, Greg. How's it going?
It's really good. Thanks, Darren. I see you've got the Fireside chat theme going behind you there.
Yep, it's been a while, so I thought, fall is starting, throw another log on the fire. We got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about today, so extra coffee in hand just in case.
Nice.
I see you're sporting a rather smart looking Ravenblack t-shirt. Are we getting ready for anything?
Yeah, I'm checking it out for OpenText World, getting ready. Some new shirts. I've got some with your size, which you may or may not want to wear.
I'll definitely be sporting it. It's worth, yeah, everybody noting. It's worth noting for everybody that you and I are going to be there.
Yeah, yeah, we're actually be three of us there. Certainly, we're looking forward, particularly anyone watching this who has any interest in what we talk about today. We're obviously very happy to chat and give you more details.
So I'm excited. Anybody who reads this title at first glance will probably get excited too. I'm guessing. So today we're going to talk about dynamic widgets, and we are focusing completely on the content server Smart View. And I'm hoping when people see this title or they hear that, they're going to perk up because we know there's a lot of potential and a lot of challenges in doing what you need to do in the content server Smart View.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about some of those things today because perhaps not everyone watching this is familiar with some of the challenges that our customers are facing.
Yeah, that's right. And we've been involved with the content server Smart View from its inception. And you and I have been lucky to talk with a lot of customers over the progression and maturation, if you will, of the Smart View over the years. And we know that there have been a lot of problems or use cases that have been solved with incremental updates to the Smart View, but we know that there's still some challenges. And
Yeah.
that's what we're going to focus on today is, what are some of the challenges that are still out there? And we're basing this on our customers today and how we're trying to get them the Smart View that they need for their business.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that due to our background, which is that we were part of the founding members of Resonate, the company that built web reports and ActiveView, that this is not our first go around with these customer challenges. So we built ActiveView on top of web reports to solve a lot of the same use cases that customers are trying to solve today with SmartView. And we were involved in some of the technology like perspectives that some people may be familiar with. But it's a different paradigm and a different set of challenges on top of the original ones. But I think we're uniquely placed in terms of our knowledge from the past and our understanding of the current situation to create a product. And we're going to talk to what we've done here.
Yeah, it's a good point because there are a lot of parallels. Obviously, what has changed is the underlying technology, the content server classic view to the smart view, but really the customer demand and the customer needs, they still stay the same. And like you said, we've had the opportunity to kind of go through that process of identifying those challenges and delivering a product that meets the needs of those challenges for those users. So the technology's changed, but the problem is still the same. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Cool.
So we're actually going to dive into kind of like a technical fireside chat where we will show you some of the challenges today and kind of address the same use case or the same user need, but how we approach it differently with our dynamic widgets. So there'll be demos. We'll talk a little bit about the product itself and how to get it deployed. We'll talk about the API, and we'll finish, of course, with our future plans. But before we jump into that as well, it's worth noting that anybody who's watched our videos in the past, one of our core design principles is that we are creating products that are very easy to deploy in Content Server. So we will talk about this this product, Dynamic Widgets, but also how easy we've made it to incorporate it into your system. And hopefully that piques some interest right now, and we'll talk about that later.
It all sounds great. Let's move on.
So just like any product that's out there, the first thing you got to know is, what are we solving? So the consensus that we've seen over the years is that customers are encouraged to use the Smart View. And there's always different types of adopters, right? So there's the people who are very excited when a new technology comes out. They know the capabilities are limited, but they want to use it anyways and use what's there. Then as time goes on, we know that products go through versions that go into maintenance mode. So there's a bit of an urgency to upgrade into, newer technology, in this case, migrating their users to the Smart View out of fear that maybe the classic UI won't be supported anymore. And where we are now is that the Content Server Smart View has quite a lot of out-of-the-box capabilities. There's lots of different types of widgets. There's tools for creating what we call perspectives, which is kind of a WYSIWYG drag and drop widgets into a page to design it. But fundamentally, the challenge stays the same. Customers expect or want to use the Content Server Smart View, and they want to do it in a way that isn't using a feature that was designed generically for everybody. They want the Smart View to be tailored. They want it to be personal to them. They want their users to be able to do the things that they need to do, because otherwise, why would they move to the Smart View?
Exactly.
Now, we won't go into too much in terms of all the different options for doing that tailoring and customization. I'm going to, put on my hat of humility here and say I have tried to work with the SmartView SDK. I'm a certified content server developer and administrator. We've built lots of stuff over the years, using Live Link Builder and OScript. But man, I found the SmartView SDK very difficult to get started. There's just so many little pieces that have to fit perfectly. And, personally speaking, one of the challenges you and I have been facing building things for the SmartView is the code control and just, creating that development environment that you and I can collaborate on and, manage that code. How do we build changes and throw them to each other? Man, it's been really, really difficult. So yeah. I'd say, first of all, this product came about just because you and I had hit a level of frustration.
Yeah, and I think we've definitely heard from partners and customers, asking us for training, which we used to provide, trying to figure out how to do what they want to do with this SDK. And I think part of it is too that a lot of customers have become used to working with something like web reports and other things within Content Server that allow them, even for a business user, to create some functionality and extend what they want to do relatively easily without setting up a whole JavaScript development environment, which, as you say, has been quite challenging. So that's, I think, where we see our customers and customers asking, is there an equivalent of ActiveView for SmartView? So what we've seen increasingly is customers taking advantage of the fact that SmartView supports web report widgets, something our former team created within OpenText, and then using that to create their custom functionality. So that has become a very standard workaround, certainly that we've seen and heard from our customers and partners, is to use web reports widgets in all manner of ways to create these custom perspectives, custom pages within Content Server without having to go in and design their own widgets using the development kit. And I think that's kind of where we reached, where we were advising and training on that side of things with our web reports expertise, and quickly realizing that as good as that is, and as relatively easy as it is, that it's not everything, because it wasn't designed to be a complete customization solution. And that's very much where we come in. Before we get into looking at what we've developed with dynamic widgets, I'm going to show on some examples a few of the problems that many of you have come across, I'm sure, when you're trying to build meaningful applications using just web reports and widgets. The first thing is that the concept of being smart UI or Smart View as it's called now, was very much because it has a system of rules. And when it was first created, it was the ActiveView rules engine that was used, and there were a variety of different rules. And the point was that when someone is entering a folder and looking at SmartView, they might get different views depending on certain criteria. So what group they're in, for example. And that definitely provides a dynamic feel to the way this works. But the limitation is that for each potentially minor difference in the view of the screen, you need another perspective. So in this case here, we have two perspectives, each with rules. One of them, set up like this in the Perspectives Manager, gives us this. For another user on another condition, it might get something like this. And so it's subtly different. Again, these are very minor examples showing a different widget in this position. And once you've loaded these perspectives and the rules have been applied, you have what you have. There's no changing. The widgets remain in the position they were in the size they were in, with the content that was in them, unless you've done something fairly clever. So this is the first perspective. You can define a layout, and the rules in this case, I've simply set this so this one won't show up for me. But when you look at these rules, you're limited to a few things. Start with, this was originally designed for different kinds of devices like iPads or phones. These days, a lot of the things we build are pretty reactive to those devices anyway. User and group are fairly useful, particularly group, as you can have different views for different groups, and that's very useful. Privileges, it's limited to public, some user creations, admin. There isn't a lot of granularity here, but again, it does allow you to hide certain things at the time of loading based on some of these factors. As I say, originally this supported any kind of expression you could build using the web reports engine, but this is now constrained to the most common use cases. Again, though, this is what you're left with. And as far as what you've designed in the Perspective Manager, that's exactly what you will get each and every time these rules are applied. We look at this one here with the Web Reports widget. And this is an example of the Web Reports widget. And I've simply applied a very simple web report that says, my name is Greg Petti. A few things you'll see about this. One is that the header, while when you define and create this, in the Perspectives Manager, you can give it a custom name, but again, that's static. Once you set it, it will always be that name. As far as the size, there's a fairly limited choice here. Single, as you saw there, double, or full page. And if we need the space, so if this size of widget or a half size is not enough for what we're trying to do, then you would need to use the full page. And once you've used the full page, you're going to have it full page and you can't change it. In this case, because it was the third widget, it's seated below these two. But if you actually change this so it was in the first position, Now you have your Web Reports widget, and the other pieces are actually hidden.
Easily missed.
Exactly. So if you have enough space to use, you can't really have other widgets that are convenient or even visible to the user. An example of that, using a simple customer example, is if you were building a search and you had built some customized filters, a search button. If you want to actually show the results, you have to use a full-size web report and show the results below. And even when you haven't actually searched, you have an empty screen down here. Any other widgets you wanted on the page would be buried below this. And this is an exact example. It is probably common to many of the people watching this. So that's a couple of things just to show you. We have the widgets we create are always in the same position, the same size, same content. They're always visible, which seems like an obvious thing. But being able to hide some widgets when you don't need them is actually quite useful. If it's maximized, it's always maximized. Widgets, so if you created a couple of widgets, for example, one for results and one for initiating a search, as is out of the box, they can't interact with each other. There's some things you can do to try and make that work, but you can also get into a problem where you have widgets that are clashing with each other because they're using the same JavaScript names and things like that. The rule set, as I said, is actually relatively limited. And every time you have a slightly different use case for that area, you would need to create a brand new perspective, even if they're relatively identical. As you saw in our example with the web report doesn't have access to any of the kind of controls and things on the header bar that you get with other types of widgets.
Mm-hmm.
You basically have this blank canvas to use. There's a couple of things here that are not really easy to demonstrate, but one is if you do have multiple widgets and you're trying to interact with them, getting them to coordinate and managing the dependencies as each widget loads are fairly difficult to determine time. So which one loads before another, if you're trying to interact with them or to borrow or use code between them or avoid clashing code, it's a fairly difficult thing to manage. So presumably, Darren, you're familiar with most of these problems.
Well, I remember the independent loading of each widget was to solve a different performance problem at the time, which was the page not displaying anything till everything was loaded. So in solving one problem, it's creating others.
That's a good point. And that was a big problem. But yes, if you're trying to have web reports interact in any way with each other, it becomes fairly tricky to get them to load in a certain order and not to change, particularly in between different versions of Content Server, where, as you say, two versions or at some point in time, they change the whole loading order algorithm. So that if you built something depending on that, you would be in trouble.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Greg. That's really well demonstrated and well stated. So that takes us to our aim. And when we look at why ActiveView was so successful, it's because it filled a technology gap that existed at the time. There were limitations that prevented organizations from having the true, fully tailored and user-centric system that users enjoyed using and could do their jobs on. So it not only filled a technology gap, we designed the product so that it was more accessible. So more people in the organization could make these types of customizations. And we saw people from all ranks of the business being able to build out ActiveView templates and apply them to their groups. And then finally, because our approach has always been to play nicely and not provide hacks or workarounds, anything that was built with ActiveView was not breaking the system. It was not creating permanent changes or overrides to the underlying code. So it made it very future friendly. So those are kind of the key principles that like we said earlier, it's different technology, but the challenges are similar. So it kind of makes sense to follow suit with the same principles. And that's what we've done here. So in the Smart View, we have perspectives, we have a lot of out-of-the-box widgets, and even web reports widgets gets us some of the way there with custom content. But the technical limitations of today, really prevent Smart View users from having that full tailored experience.
Agreed. And I think clearly one of our objectives was to take what customers are already doing with web reports in SmartView and make it sufficiently powerful that they don't have to use the SDK, and that they can get a bit further. But I think in a sense, what we're creating is a new version of ActiveView. It's the same kind of driver with web reports. Customers were using web reports in Classic to create new UIs, but it wasn't quite integrated, and so we created ActiveView. With this, we're doing something similar for SmartView by extending web reports and making it more flexible within the interface. But I think it's important to note that we're not literally recreating ActiveView, at least not so far, because the Classic and SmartView are very different frameworks. And so the aim here is to hit the same user requirements within this new environment. So what we've done and what we've created and how we're doing this is quite a bit different than ActiveView. Whether or not we add some more functionality that's for changing menus and things, we'll see. But in the meantime, we're hitting some of those use cases, and we're doing it while honoring the Smart View paradigm and working within it, and maybe getting a little bit more out of it than ActiveView had, bearing in mind ActiveView was created 15 years ago. So,
yep.
I guess what we could do now is to show some of the features we've actually built. So we'll provide some real demos here, so you can see what we've done to meet this aim and decide if you think we're there.
Yeah, I like this challenge, and let's lay it before the people.
We will. Maybe where I'll start is I showed a slide earlier of a customer system using the existing web reports in SmartView, and I'll show an early example of something we did to remedy that using Dynamic Widgets. This example I showed earlier is actually a video from a customer system. And again, you'll see this is one whole widget in full page, one of only 3 options you can select. It's made full page so we can have the ability to select filters and click search, and then have the results appear down below. And if I let this roll, we'll see the search is initiated. The results appear down below here, and limited real estate even for the results, and anything else again was pushed down below. So it becomes quite awkward, but with the existing SmartView, that's basically all you can do. If I move to a new example, this is something we built using in the background Dynamic Widgets. The filter is a little bit different looking, but it's basically the same thing. But because we're only showing the filter part in a single widget at the top, any other widgets are now visible. So when the user is not searching, they can access and they can work with this widget down below. When they are searching, first off, this is a full width, even though it's not full page, something you can't do with normal SmartView. If I let this roll, we'll end up clicking on the search. The results are there down below. You'll see it actually revealed a widget called Search Results down below, where these results have now appeared. We've also added some controls there so you can actually maximize this widget, so we can use the whole page to see the results, or we can bring it back down to that lower size, or we can get rid of it completely and go back to the state we were in before. So that's a very common use case, and I think it does a pretty good job of explaining or showing one of the things that Dynamic Widgets can do. So that's a pre-recorded example of dynamic widgets in motion, but let's get into a little more detail on specifically what we're creating. And rather than go through this, another boring slide, I'm going to use the product to actually present these bullets. So what we've created here using dynamic widgets is a page where I can initiate this presentation, and it'll let me go through the various bullets. So as you'll see here, we had a full width of the screen. Now we have a box that says features, and it's given us the first bullet to look at. So the first thing we want to talk about is the fact that we have created a brand new widget type based on the Web Reports HTML widget. And yes, we had to use the SDK to do that. So we're very aware of what's involved with the SDK development. But it is important to us that we created a new type, so we're not just reusing or working around the existing Web Reports widget. We've created a type that is designed very explicitly to support what we've built. And we can have a quick look at that in this Perspectives Manager. You'll see that we have a section for dynamic widgets, and we've actually, for this demo that I'm using and what I'm showing you here, you'll see that we have 4 of these dynamic widgets. One's not actually used, but the other ones will be used and revealed and hidden and sized and everything that we need to do as we go forward. I'll come back to this in a second. So when I click on this bullet, it will give us some description of this. So it's added through the Perspectives Manager, as you just saw. You can actually decide whether or not these widgets will be visible when we start. You'll notice when I kicked this off, there was only one widget here, and now we've revealed a second. The ability to set constants for each widget, we'll look in the Perspectives Manager. In addition to Web Reports parameters, which is always there to feed in parameters to the web report, we've allowed that you can define by way of setting some context for where this is in the widget and the unique characteristics of it, something called a constant, which I'll get into a little bit more later. When I click on this, it's revealing a third widget, and now it's going to give me some technical notes. So this is for those of you that are a little more technically inclined or want to know a little bit more about what we're actually doing. So we've built some custom JavaScript into these widgets. So when you create one, you get that extra API built into the widget. We have added technology to make sure all of the widgets you're using will work with each other. They'll load in a certain order, or at least we'll be able to know when they've all loaded and make sure we don't do anything that will break. We're using this API that's built in to initiate dynamic features. So each thing we're doing here, there is code running in the background that is initiating these changes to the widgets. A lot of this, as you'll see, it works when you click on something, and some of it we've actually using a timer to reveal things dynamically. All of this can be under control of rules we can build, whether with web reports or with JavaScript, to determine what people can see and what's revealed and when it's revealed. Behind the scenes is actually a registry. So each one of these widgets is in a registry. So we can find them, we can access them, we can use them, and we can manage them. Widgets can be simple resources. So one thing you will see here, some of these dynamic widgets, firstly, this one is set not to be visible. Also, you'll see down here that there is no web report ID. So it's now optional whether or not you load a web report. Some of these are just being used as containers. We can put things in them, we can load them dynamically. The first widget here is actually loading a web report, which is where any unique code for our presentation lies. Of course, they can all load web reports if you want. One other thing to note here is we do make mandatory that each one of these resources, you give it some kind of a unique identifier. And that's how we can control and know which widgets we're accessing when we're processing them. So moving on to the next bullet, We're providing a more granular type of Smart View. So as we saw, Smart View allows us to control which perspectives are seen, but you need a whole perspective, and once it's there, it's there. So we're allowing that each piece of the perspective, so in other words, each widget, we can determine based on any number of conditions, events, or other actions, what is visible, what the size is, what the content is, not just for the whole page, and also it's not static. We can create complex rules around that, and you'll see that we can control the size, the visibility, so whether you hide them or reveal them, what's in them, what's in the title bars. So you see, as we can see here, we've got custom icons. We could use web reports expressions to control that, so in terms of what loads in the widget. Or we can use JavaScript, even making AJAX requests to get information to determine what we then reveal and what we then show. The widget state can be changed at any time by the application that you've built. Custom API functions can be executed from multiple different scenarios. So for example, if you've built some kind of application, whether it's a search filter, you can invoke this API obviously from anywhere in your code. Also, you can define custom icon buttons like this, and you can determine not only what they look like and where they go, but you can create a whole script of things that are performed when you click on these icons. Could also set up JavaScript events that occur and that control this. And we've actually included a built-in kind of a timer. Of course, you can use JavaScript to set timer, but we've created another add-on object which allows you to queue things, which is how we're doing these kind of slow build bullets. We have set up a queue of reveals that happen on a 1-second basis. So that's built into our tool. This is a slightly more elaborate point, but over and above the things I've just described, you could have timers running that check data on the system. So maybe every now and then you have an application that checks to see if there's a news update, and then based on that, it reveals a widget and shows news in it. Or you might have warnings that pop up, or so you could have data that changes in real time without having to reload the perspective, change information on the page. So by reloading widgets or hiding and revealing, you could essentially have a pop-up that is revealed under certain conditions. And that's where we can use our built-in timer object. And you can also use logic you've built in your JavaScript to do this kind of thing.
Very cool.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's very cool so far. And one thing I just want to point out as people are looking at you go through your slides, these are what, 1/3 width widgets?
Yes.
So size options that aren't available through the perspective manager itself.
Correct. And you'll note the first widget actually started as full screen, then we made it 1/3, and then we set these resource widgets to 1/3 as we reveal them and fill them. And again, you could have custom icons in here that you click an arrow and then it makes it full screen, to look at it a bit more closely, that kind of thing.
Right.
The interaction of these widgets with each other is, I think, a fairly key thing here, and the last bullet I'm going to present in this. And so the thing we're doing here is this widget has code running in it, and it's telling or making each one of these other resources reveal themselves, and then it's populating content in them externally. So that's one aspect of being able to interact. We can also load, as we are doing here, the content. And there's another thing that's kind of tricky. I know that there are some developers who might create multiple web reports widgets and then try and share things between them, or one widget can look at data in another. And part of our whole registry approach is that we've allowed that you can save or store information in the registry that is visible or available to all the other widgets. There are actually 2 or 3 ways that they can interact besides, simply being able to change these containers. Also through that, we get away from naming conflicts, which you may run into if you've created widgets or use the same web report in multiple widgets, as we sometimes do, where you have clashes of naming. So we have some mechanisms to help with that. And also, as we mentioned before, the ability to prevent race conditions. So this speaks to some of the technicalities of that, the registry, this concept of having constants, which I showed briefly. So you can define identifiers that you can use in your widget. We've even provided the ability to specify a new syntax for that. And that allows you to make your widgets unique and to have other widgets use your identifier to access your information. Again, these little boxes on the right are for the more technically inclined. What we've done as far as managing the race conditions is in our API, you can define actions that you want to happen as and when everything is fully and completely initialized. So if you want to immediately execute an action that is dependent on one of these other widgets, you can do that safely using our interface. Finally, in this little demo, you'll see this icon has now changed because we reached the end of our bullets, and we can refresh or essentially start over again at the beginning. Pretty cool, Darren?
Yeah, this is really cool. I love this.
Better than our slides, but it didn't make me any less long-winded, so there's that.
Yeah. So I mean, what I like about this is that you're just scratching the surface in terms of the options that the API offers for like things like sizing, the loading, and just to kind of reiterate some of the key things here, just the way we are creating unique areas, each with a unique name, the way they talk to each other, like this just barely scratches the surface of what the API can do.
Well, hopefully we'll show a little bit more of what it can do, but ultimately, I think you're going to show some more use case type of stuff. Before I give you the reins, is it all right if I indulge myself with one more little tricky little demo, which I happen to have ready to go here?
Yeah.
This is a little something we created using our timer object. And it's just going to run through a bunch of things that the dynamic widgets can do, automated, and I'll talk through them as it goes. So I just fire off the demo. First thing it's done is it's opening up widgets and it's showing each one with different content. Now it's going to get rid of resource number 3. So now we just have 1 and 2. 2 is still there. It's now dynamically resizing resource number 2. And you can see there's all manner of different sizes we can use there. Now it's loaded a web page in this particular widget, and now it's going to maximize it. And again, it's going to collapse it back down to the size it was before. Now it's dynamically adding some icons here. And now it's going to basically stop doing things automatically. But with these icons, I could now maximize this page. You'll see that it's dynamically changed this, so that's now a minimize, and we can even close it. You'll notice these other 2 were along for the ride and just getting pushed around the page as we changed it. And finally, as I did in the other thing, we've changed on this particular widget so we could start our demo over again. And that's just a quick thing we use as a quick run through of some of the functionality and how it can basically dance for you.
It's awesome.
Okay, Darren, why don't you show us some worked examples? This will be based on customer requirements, but really building some real stuff, not just dancing slides. Give a better idea of some of the things we can do with dynamic widgets.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the customer requirements that we've came across, I'll be honest, I've stolen it and made a part of my content server environment. Um, Basically, to start from the beginning, the requirement is, as you know, when you create a perspective, as you were mentioning, you design it in the perspective manager and it's static. There's no changing the orientation, the sizing, or anything of widgets unless you go back into the perspective manager and change it. And that's okay, but I remember even early days when we had the homepage, we had like a hero tile widget on the homepage, which took up a quarter of the page, basically to say good morning, good afternoon. And you would see it, acknowledge it once, but it was always there. So for us, what if you wanted to tuck away some functionality, but bring it to your fingertips when you need it and only when you need it? So this is based on a customer requirement that we worked with, but like I said, I kind of stole it. So there is a perspective applied to this page. It looks just like a normal folder browse. But what I've done here is I've added a keyboard shortcut. So if I hit Option S, I'm bringing up a search tool that I made for me. So for me, when we're working in our environment, there's a lot of times where I'm in the folder that I'm working in, and I want to pull content from somewhere else into the folder that I'm working in. What I don't want to do is the typical workflow where you go and navigate to the item that you want to move or copy, and then look up where you want to send it to and send it. So this tool that I just built for myself lets me to able to do a quick search. I'll search for report because I know we got tons of objects with the word report in them. And as you can see, once the search is complete, it opens up my results widget. And here's all the different results. And let's look for web reports with lots of stuff. Any of these items, I can select it and it pulls up a third widget, gives me a little bit of information, and I have a button here that says copy here. So basically, when I need it, I can pull up a search, find the item, verify that this is the item that I want, and hit a button, and it'll copy it in here. When I'm done, I can easily just close these all away. Now, I kind of glossed over a few things here, but as you were pointing out, we have the ability to add these custom icons in the corner. So repeating the search, this is one way we can look at this, but we also have the ability to maximize it. So for this type of search, there's a lot of items here. So this is an even friendlier way to quickly find and verify the object that I want. Minimize it, and then here we go. Also, you know, each of these widgets could have their own options, so we can close them individually or just close them out completely.
You know, what's cool about that I hadn't really thought about before, Darren, is I mean, it's a cool bit of functionality, but the whole idea that you can have hidden widgets, so in this case, our dynamic widgets, that are present in the page but not visible, and being present, they can add, in this case, a hotkey so that without ever being visible to the user, they're immediately available, or you can make things immediately visible and available based on, you know, a variety of different things you might want to do. Yeah, so that's very cool.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I mean, to be honest, low-hanging fruit here. Just think about administrators. Maybe they want to get a system alert out. That widget could always just be sitting there hidden, ready to go for an administrator to send out an alert. So when the user comes in, they see the modal. Maybe it's saying, you know, just a reminder, we're having a system maintenance shutdown period tomorrow. And because it's a web report, when the user acknowledges that modal and then clears it off, we could even be recording those results of who's acknowledged it or not, and keep that in like a forms table. But more importantly, we can also have those types of alerts pop up once, have it acknowledged, and then not have it pop up anymore if we don't want it to. So we don't have to have a modal pop up every single time that there's a page refresh.
Right. No, that's those are some good use cases.
One thing I'll quickly show you is I, started to go down the rabbit hole of, how would we do this without dynamic widgets? Now, albeit the styling's not the same, but without dynamic widgets, when you go into the perspective manager, um, one of the most painful things now, having used dynamic widgets, is just how limited the options are in the perspective manager for a web reports widget. So when we bring a HTML widget in here, we have single width, double width, and full page is quite literally the full page. So if we wanted to do the same kind of search in here, just like you were showing with your customer example, like the kind of the before state is that tile, that widget has to always be in the screen. And in this case, um, we can start doing the search and bringing it up, but it's clunky. It's always there. And there's no widget size to do the full width without taking up the whole page. Certainly, there's no thirds and 2/3. And, kind of most painful is the tile's always here. We can't minimize it when we don't need it. And to be honest, I started creating this for our Fireside chat to show as a before example. It was taking so much time, I just gave up. So this is kind of the state that I left it in.
Yeah, I don't think you need to invest any more effort in that. But yeah, I think when we emphasize that you can start off, you have more options when you load the page in the first place. But obviously, the option, whether buttons in your little app there or on the header bar, to change the size according to whatever it is you're trying to do. So completely adaptable to whatever the application's supposed to be doing.
Yes. And it goes without saying, the other thing that we can't do here is send information, between widgets or have one widget influence another widget, which, something for like my example of the tool that I use, like that's a critical piece of it, right? It's we're passing information dynamically between widgets, which up until now can't be done either.
Yeah. I think it's worth saying that there's some very talented developers out there, and the same way that what we're doing is not necessarily magic, you can come up with some elaborate ways to do the same sort of thing. But there's a number of things that have to be conquered, which we've conquered and built into a standard widget with a standard methodology in a pre-created app that we support and already works with SmartView from the 20 odds to the most recent versions of content servers. So all of the concerns and problems that people have when you create unique solutions, we're taking care of all of that, and we've found a way to make this as robust as possible.
Yeah, and that is a great call out because um, yes, there's lots of talented developers, and there, some of the stuff you can achieve through the SDK. But even for building this, the majority of this code is CSS and a little bit of HTML. So, your CSS doesn't have to be this fancy, but for me, the technologies, the coding tools that I'm using is HTML, JavaScript, and the JavaScript is actually dirt simple because we've created all of the abilities to, dynamically change titles, dynamically resize, appear, disappear, load contents. We've created the API, so you don't even need to build out the JavaScript for that.
As you can see in that little sample there, for anyone who wants to see a little bit behind the curtain, there is some of the JavaScript. You can get a resource from the registry that you want to manipulate, and then you have an API with a variety of different functions built in. I'll share a few of those a little bit later, but that's just an idea of, this is the demo that Darren just showed, some of the code within there, much of which is to make it look pretty.
That's right. And order of magnitude, I mean, we're talking, it probably took me a couple hours to put this together at max. And like I said, most of that time was actually figuring out the CSS, not the JavaScript.
Yeah, that's very cool. Just to carry on from that snippet of code you were showing earlier, here's a snapshot with some very quick syntax. Ultimately, there'll be detailed API information. It's not that complicated, but there's quite a bit of flexibility if you need it. The first thing is everything is stored in this registry, and to access that, there's a global variable. From there, you can request any resource. It is possible to use the actual cell address, but we suggest and encourage that you, when you've defined IDs for each of our widgets, that you then use those IDs to access the resource. So it's your way of uniquely addressing, without any of the back-end stuff, every resource you want to use. From there, once you've got a resource, you can then act on that with another set of functions. Within the registry itself, though, it also lets you define any actions or any stuff you want to run when you can guarantee that everything's loaded. So that's through this function, and the ability to set and get variable information. So things that you want to share between widgets, where you can leave something for another widget to pick up and that kind of thing. Once you have a resource, these are all, or not all, but several of the functions you can use on that widget, whether it's literally writing text content, which is what I was doing in my demos, or actually loading a web report into the widget, or using a URL, loading an iframe into a particular widget, so if web pages or things that warrant an iframe. Ability to set and change custom icons with custom actions in the header bar, and to change the title for any widget. There's also one for setting the icon in any widget as well. One thing, you'll notice this is divided into Ravenblack widgets. These are all things that you can do with our unique widget types, but we've recently added the capability that for other types of widgets, favorites or recently accessed, you can also hide, reveal, size, expand, collapse, or set the title bar. Some of these other things require literally overwriting the content of the widget, so we don't support those, but you can access and mess around with all of the widgets. Quick dip back into some of the code just for one final point on the specifics of the syntax. You might have seen in Darren's example that when we're specifying an ID, this syntax here was used. And this is a syntax we've introduced in addition to the fact you can access web reports parameters. This mustache type syntax allows you to reference and look up the ID for the particular widget. Besides my ID, if you specified any constants, you can reference them through here. And that allows your web reports code to be completely independent of where it's placed within a particular perspective, and any differences, and be able to reuse your web reports code in multiple places. A few more examples here of the syntax. And one other thing here is we're using, whenever you declare functions in your code, you can use this constant for your ID, which makes sure that the function name is completely unique. Apologies for that, a little bit of a deep dive more for developers, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a taste of how some of this works.
And I guess that kind of just leads us to the last thing that we should probably cover, which is how do we, get started? How do we deploy this?
Well, one thing that's common to all of our products, and I'll go into the system here, is they're all built as CS apps. Not all of our viewers, even those fairly experienced with web reports, will know what that is, but it is something that's built into Content Server under the admin pages, and under, I've previously typed this in, but under Applications Management. And rather than go into there, I'm going to use our Application Analyzer product, because it's going to aid in me showing you a couple of things here. So you will install this through that page. If you've ever done it before, or if you haven't ever done it before, it's quite easy to do. And you end up, our system has a lot of apps on it, as you can imagine, and here's an app. So we would give you a zip file, you unzip it into a application staging folder, and it installs from there. The actual application itself has very little in it as far as web reports. Is really the demo widget we used for the dancing slides earlier. A web report that's just there as kind of a marker, a couple of things that are used for demo purposes. But of course, the real power of it is within the stuff we have, the file components under the app where all the SmartView stuff lays. One thing that might be of interest to people who do know CS apps is that this is the manifest file. For every app has a manifest file. And you'll see here there's something called widget components. This is a somewhat unknown part of CS apps because it's not built into the UI, but it allows us, without any OScript module, to install the custom widget through this CS app. So when you install it, this will automatically be added to the SmartView registry of available widgets. And once you've done that, then when you're in the Perspectives Manager, you'll see Ravenblack Dynamic Widgets and a dynamic widget which you can drag and drop as you would with any other widget. Once you've installed, and so in any perspective where you want to use the dynamic widgets, you will use the Perspective Manager as normal, add them in, and when you select them, it will look a lot like a Web Reports HTML widget. We've left the sizes because you can change that through our API anyway. You can give it a title and an icon as you could before. Of course, both of these can be changed dynamically through the API. The header normally we'll want to leave on because some of the functionality works best with the header. It's not mandatory. Scrolling as per before. We've added in something called visible because sometimes, for example, in this case, these three widgets here, we don't really want them to be visible when it fires up in the first place. We used to put code in whichever widget, one of the widgets to hide the rest, but now you can just decide that you want, when it first loads, not to be visible. The only mandatory parameters we discussed before is you give each widget a unique ID. It can be any word or anything you want, but it needs to be unique between all of your widgets. If you want a web report to load when it first fires up, you can specify that here. And finally, the idea of constants. So whether or not you use constants is up to you. It's not mandatory. But in this case, we have a widget here we want to control that has the ID res2. So for this widget, we created a constant. So within our code, we're just using the identifier R2, but it maps to this widget. It sounds a bit convoluted as I'm explaining it, but it does provide some abstraction so that your code doesn't break when you put web reports in different perspectives or things like that. You can then, from the widget, the perspective itself, configure how these guys can communicate with each other. So the constants thing I showed in the previous slide you can access them using that mustache syntax, or for that matter, using the web reports parameter syntax, which also works if you define parameters here. So you add resources, as many as you think you might need. There's very little to configure. Mostly it all defaults to what you need. You update it, and then all of the registry stuff and all the API stuff is built into the widgets, and you don't have to worry about including it. It's just there, which also makes it faster. So that's basically all of the steps involved in deploying this. Install an app, and then go to Perspective Manager and start adding these widgets as you see fit. Obviously, you're developing in web reports using whatever editor. Obviously, we've built some things into our application analyzer, which make that easier, but you can use the API in whatever editor you're working with. So basically, fairly simple. So Darren, I think we've covered as much as we can about the existing functionality, what it solves, and why we created it, and hopefully we'll get lots of good feedback or bad feedback on what we've done. And
Yep.
it's probably a good idea, particularly as we're soliciting input, to go through some of our futures and what's in the pipeline right now. And as our product manager, maybe you can go through that.
So some of the things we're actively working on now, kind of as a quick, fast follow-up to this initial release, are things like modals. So right now we have opened up the ability for widgets to talk to each other and be dynamic with kind of real-time changes in the screen and communicate between each other. But we also want to find the most effective and supported way of adding a new layer of information on top of the widgets in the perspective. Modals are a very common thing. They can be quick little messages, or like I suggested before, these could be system alerts or notifications from the administrator. So there's a lot of use for having dynamic modals, fit properly within the Smart View. Another area we've been looking into is the idea of a shadow DOM. And really where this is coming from is when you're designing and developing a dynamic widget, I think there's a few methods that you can use. One is to take a look at what the Smart View provides in terms of libraries. So styling libraries and JavaScript functions and so on, and trying to build and design within that. In a lot of cases, especially for us, we tend to start from scratch, build out from, build the styling and the functionality first, and then the styling around that. And that presents its own challenges because there's a lot of conflicts with the Smart View CSS master libraries, and there's always challenges with conflicting CSS and conflicting JavaScript depending on where that JavaScript is and where the code it's calling is located. So we're just looking at making that even more simple and more clear to understand. When you're working within a dynamic widget, can we have a very isolated, empty box to work with without any interruptions or conflicts from anywhere else in the page? Third, extending our API. This is where we're curious to see, what's missing. What have we forgotten? Like I said, already we cover so much of how a widget interacts within a perspective. I think we've covered so much of, what a customer may want to do in terms of manipulating and using a widget. So, let us know what have we missed. And I'm excited to be working with some of the customers we're working with now and new ones in the short term, just to figure out what's our next version of our API, which new functionality can we add in there. One thing we didn't mention before is that Dynamic Widgets, as it ships today, already has a library of icons that we believe are, kind of going to be frequently used. So things like maximize, minimize. We provide a library of those icons already, and it covers a lot of the user prompting for the widgets that you may need. But we'll always be looking at expanding that, not only in terms of different styling and give more options for customers to style their dynamic widgets with the rest of their environment, but also as we extend the API, we're going to be adding more icons to make it easy to use those new features. And we already make it very easy today to use these libraries. Basically, you're just referring to the names of them. You don't have to load anything. It's all there ready to go.
Should add too that you can, we also make it possible that you can use icons either that you have stored somewhere or by URL or existing Smart View icons. So it's it's pretty powerful, but we already discovered a number of icons that suit a number of purposes, and yeah, we'll keep adding to that.
I mean, that's where we've always felt our most comfortable wheelhouse is, for the people who just want to get going, giving everything that's kind of pre-built, ready to go, use it, and you're done, but also cater to the people who want to bring in their own stuff, get complicated and complex in their coding. We cater to those as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, kind of like the second last point here is our increased SmartView influence. So looking back at, the parallels with ActiveView started as a way of changing the look and feel of browse containers, but it exploded. Its functionality, spread out to things like menus and different parts of kind of the global content server. So that's something we're exploring as well. We've created the dynamic widgets and the functionality to work with them, but what else can we do in terms of the wider perspective and some of the core features of the content server smart view and making those dynamic and user centric as well. And then last and not least, ideas. Like I said, we're pretty confident this will give our customers a quick and easy boost to getting the smart view that they need. But we are always here to explore with our customers what are the pain points that come up, what are the new challenges that come up with new versions of content server, and just ideas for how our customers want to use dynamic widgets.
Yeah, we're probably one of our own biggest customers in that we use these things and develop them to meet needs that we see. But the more people are contributing to that, the more we can build. And we've I like to think we've built a very good base in terms of the framework we've got that we can now expand with new API functions and other ways of expanding the capability of it. So it's really somewhat limited by our imagination and the imagination of our partners and customers.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, for sure. All right, Greg. Well, I think that covers the excitement we wanted to share today. I'm going to put another log on the fire and maybe kick my feet up and relax. But as always, I love our fireside chats. So thank you so much for taking us through all this exciting, new release.
Yeah, this is going to be one of our longer ones, I'm guessing, but a lot of good new information to get out there, and we're really excited to communicate it. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch everyone next time. Bye, Darren.
See you at Enterprise World.
Okay.